Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I hope you're all well. I'm really excited to make your next sewing project. Thank you so much for buying one of our G&G Sewing Society kits, and in this video I'm going to be chatting to you all about the dress that I'm wearing here. It's the Doe Magnolia, and you're going to be making it in some of the most beautiful Liberty Viscose print. I've just been so excited about this kit. I think it might even be my favourite Sewing Society one so far. And basically me and Meg went through the back catalogue of all the Liberty prints, and we chose this one and got Liberty to print it onto this gorgeous viscose base just for us. So it just feels very special because I chose it and I put it on the fabric, got them to put it on the fabric just for me, and yeah, because I'm such a Liberty fan, it's just very exciting. So when you come to open up your kit, inside you're going to find the Deer and Doe pattern. Now hopefully you would have seen our message on the listing when you bought the kit that Deer and Doe have released that there is an error in the pattern for the butterfly sleeve that affects sizes 46 and 48, and basically the sleeve ends up a little bit too small. So they have provided a link to a PDF where you can download a different pattern piece for the sleeve. It's only 6 or 7 pages, so it's not that much. So just bear that in mind. They did actually email to tell me that mainly the grading issue affected the larger sizes, which are only available in the PDF pattern, and that they had been contacted by people who had made the 46 and 48 and had found that it was okay. But they have released this updated pattern piece anyway, so yeah, just to make you aware of that, and sorry on behalf of Deer and Doe about that slight error in the pattern. And then also in your kit you have got your matching thread, you've got some prim forming tape interfacing. This is an additional item from what's recommended on the pattern as a notion, but I'm going to show you how to use it shortly, and I think it makes a really big difference when sewing with viscose fabric like this one. And then you've also got your sewing machine needles and a size 70 pack. Then you've also got your G&G woven label. You've got a little note postcard just so you can make a record of what you've made and the sizes and any adjustments, just so that you know what you did the next time you come to make the pattern. And then you've also got some Atelier Brunette viscose binding that just complements the fabric really well. We wanted to give you a ready-made binding that was the same sort of weight and would move and behave in the same way as the main fabric. And then of course you have got your fabric as well. So obviously the pattern on this fabric is quite large scale and it's quite abstract. So when I came to make my dress and I came to cut it out, I kind of just didn't really pay attention to the pattern at all. I just sort of went for it, and I think because of the orientation and the sort of abstract design of the pattern, I don't think you need to worry about any pattern matching, so please don't feel like you need to worry about that basically. So once you've opened up your pack, first thing you're going to want to do is pre-wash your fabric. So I washed mine on 30 degrees and I just used a gentler spin cycle, so just used an 800. I left it to air dry and then gave it a really good press, totally flat, before I came to cut it out. Now in terms of choosing a size, I made a size 38, which on the size chart for the pattern, it fits my bust and my hip measurements, but my waist is a little bit bigger than what is on the size 38 chart for that size. But when I looked at the finished garment measurements, I could see that there was still going to be like a little bit of ease. It was going to mean it was quite fitted at the waist. And so I just still made like a straight up size 38. I did use a very slightly smaller seam allowance just over the waist section, but the fabric's actually quite forgiving as well. It does move and sort of mold to your body quite easily. So yeah, I just made a straight up 38, even though my waist was bigger than what the size chart said, and it's been absolutely fine. So really, once you've plotted your actual body measurements on the chart, I would have a look at the finished measurements as well, just to help guide you in terms of picking a size. Now, when you come to cut your fabric out, the viscose is quite slippery. It's going to move around when you cut it out. So I would suggest that you do use plenty pins when you come to do it. And also, because you've got quite a long length of fabric, it's unlikely that you're going to fit all of that length on your table at the same time. I don't even have a cutting table big enough to fit that length of fabric onto. So what I would suggest that you do, you're going to have to sort of pin it and kind of work your way down the fabric, but so that there is not any sort of drag or pull on the fabric, I would either, the fabric that's sort of effectively hanging over the edge of the table, I would recommend either like folding that up just so it's flat on the table, or maybe put a chair under the table. or I cut it in my kitchen, so I use a little like bar stool at the end just to rest the fabric on, just so that as you pin and cut out, the fabric's not like getting dragged at all. And I usually always sort of square my fabric up to the corner of the table or the surface I'm working on as well. And it might even be that you want to pin your selvages together, because even once you've got your selvages together, where the fold in the fabric is can still sort of shift down a little bit. So it's important just to sort of like smooth everything out, make sure that everything's like nice and straight, and yeah, just spend a bit more time kind of prepping your fabric before you actually cut it out, and yeah, use plenty of pins. So one of the first things in the instructions that it asks you to do is the stay stitching on these diagonal pieces here that make up the bodice. And I always use the Prim Forming Tape interfacing on viscose fabric for this, because stay stitching really close to the edge on a fine fabric can be a little bit tricky. The fabric can move a lot, it can kind of sometimes get stuck in the machine a little bit. So what the forming tape interfacing is, if you've not seen it or heard of it before, it's basically an iron-on interfacing that is woven, and it is cut on the bias, so that it means it is really easy to like mould it around curves and yeah, make it fit into shapes that aren't straight lines basically. And running through the forming tape interfacing is like a chain stitch, like a stay stitch that is quite firm and it doesn't stretch. So effectively what you're doing with the forming tape interfacing is actually ironing the stay stitch onto the fabric, and it just means that the fabric can stay totally still and stable, as flat on the surface of your ironing board, and then just use a sort of medium to cool iron and then just press the interfacing on. You might want to just check the temperature of your iron before you really go for it, because it is very lightweight and it can sort of shrivel up if the iron is too hot. So it's kind of getting the balance between having the iron hot enough that the glue on it's actually going to melt and stick to the fabric, but it's not so hot that the whole thing sort of shrivels up. So yeah, you're going to put that on the diagonal edges of the crossover, and then I would suggest putting it on the back neckline bodice as well. The instructions don't tell you to stay stitch there, but it is another curved area of the neckline that could potentially stretch when you put your bias binding on, so I would recommend just putting it on the back bodice as well. So the next thing I wanted to give you a few tips on is the princess seams that are in the bodice. So the princess seams that are in this bodice are what gives it shape. So rather than having darts, you've got these really curved seams here at the side, which give you the shaping in the bust. So it can be a little bit tricky when you come to sew it together, because you've basically got one curved bit of fabric that looks like it's got to try and match another curved bit of fabric, and when you look at them, you might almost think, how can they possibly go together? But my tips are really to make sure that you do mark the notches in the pattern pieces and pin the notches first. You know that they've definitely got to go together, and then pin the start and end of the seam, and that sort of breaks the seam down into two smaller sections, where it's then easier to ease and manipulate the fabric together and make sure that the raw edges line up. I always put my pins in at a right angle to the raw edge, because it's just a much more specific way to pin when you've got a really curved edge like this. And just make sure, yeah, you use plenty of pins. You might, you could then just go and sew it in the machine. That's what I did. If you're not confident about doing that, you could hand tack it beforehand if you wanted to. But yeah, I just went and sewed it on the machine. So the main thing really is that you take your time with the pinning in that section, and remember that you are creating something that is 3D. So if you lay the fabric flat on a surface, you know, the edges aren't going to line up and it isn't going to all sort of fit together. You do have to kind of hold it up and almost like raise your hand up so that the fabric can drape around it, and it means that it can start to create its shape a little bit more. If you've got the fabric flat on a surface and you're trying to pin it, it can sometimes be harder to get things to line up because the seam isn't flat. It's creating 3D shape and form. So if you hold it up like it's 3D as you pin it, just makes it a little bit easier. So when you come to put the bias binding on, the bias binding that is included in the pack comes, you know, pre-folded. It's not a flat bit of tape. But the way that the instructions ask you to put it on, it's going to mean that you have to actually iron out all of those folds that are in the bindings, and then fold the whole thing in half so that the raw edges are together, and then give it a good press again. So you need to do that before you come to put it onto your garment. And then you're going to line up the raw edges of the binding with the raw edges of the bodice and its right sides together, and then you're going to sew it on all the way around. I then trimmed mine back just a little bit, and then you want to press the binding up and away from the bodice. And then just to help it stay on the inside of the garment, which I think is especially important on a much lighter, finer fabric like viscose, you want to understitch it. So this is where you're stitching through the binding and the seam allowances underneath. So you don't see that line of stitching on the finished dress, it's all on the inside. So you do that line of understitching first, and then you want to make sure that the whole binding then gets pressed to the inside of the garment, and it'll quite naturally sort of fold and kind of sit on the inside. Give it a good press, and then you're ready to top stitch all the way around to hold the binding in place. Now, if you do want to put the G&G woven label into your garment, I would suggest just slipping it under the binding at the centre back before you do that final top stitching, and then when you do the top stitching it just catches the label in, and yeah, then it's sewn into place at the same time as doing the binding. Now, when you come to make the ties for the dress, got this really flattering ties that then tie in a nice bow at the back. What I would suggest is that once you've sewn the ties together, before you turn them inside out, is to clip the corners at the pointy bits, and then press the seam allowances in towards the centre of the tie, and then turn it inside out. It just makes it a little bit easier to press it flat. I didn't do that the first time, and I was having real trouble getting the seams to open out and press flat. It was like they wanted to just sort of tuck in themselves. So I ended up turning it like back the wrong way round again and pressing it first, and it did help just to get the full shape of the tie pressed out once it was round the right way. So yeah, I would suggest spending a bit of time doing that before you turn the ties inside out. Now, when you come to put the concealed zip in, I've got a few tips for putting that in if you are new to concealed zips. They are actually my favourite type of zips. They can be a little bit tricky to master initially because there's like a fine balance of where you have to stitch, but once you get used to it, I actually find them a lot quicker and easier, and then, you know, they are really good because they're invisible and it just looks like a seam in the fabric. So I potentially quite controversially iron my zip before I put it in. Now, a lot of people don't do this, and I'll explain the reasons why, but I find that method works for me. So I'm going to show you what I do and you can see what you think. But basically, when you get an invisible zip or a concealed zip, you have to sort of try and identify from the start what is the right side and the wrong side of the zip, because it's the opposite way around in a concealed zip. So on a concealed zip, the teeth are at the back, they're on the wrong side of the zip, and then those flat tapes of the zip are the right side of the zip. So it's important to get that the right way around, so when you come to put it onto your fabric, you're still using that same old rule of right sides together. Now, the teeth on the invisible zip are they can kind of move around a little bit, and the idea is that when you come to stitch the zip onto the fabric, that you want to stitch as close to those teeth as possible, and this is where the fine balance comes in, because you have to get really close to them, but you can't actually like stitch on them, otherwise the zip won't go up and down. So the ironing bit is all about basically getting the teeth into a certain position that makes it a bit easier to stitch closer to them. Now remember, you do need a specific invisible zip foot on your machine when you come to sew an invisible zip on. It's different from the standard zip foot, and the invisible zip foot has little channels in it which help the teeth to sort of stay up. So hopefully you can see in the video that when you open the zip, the teeth are sort of flat, but you can use your finger to kind of roll them up. So this is what I use the iron for. So I have the iron not too hot, not too cool, and I'll use my finger to sort of peel back the teeth on one side of the zip, and then use the edge of the iron just to sort of quite quickly move along the edge of those teeth all the way along. And what it does is, instead of the teeth sitting flat like that, they're then sort of standing upright. Now what you want to avoid is that you don't iron them too much over and they end up like flipping kind of 180 degrees so that they're totally flat. It's about getting them from that angle to that angle, and it just makes it easier to then feed it into those channels of the zip foot. So I'll do that on both sides, and then line the zip tape up with the dress, right sides together, You can then pin it, or you could hand tack it in if you wanted to, and then use the zip foot on the machine to sew it on. So the zip's open when you come to put it on. You just put one side of the zip on at a time. And as you're feeding the zip through that zip foot, try to keep the teeth in that sort of upright position as you feed it through. So even though you've still ironed it, or maybe you haven't, still try to sort of use your fingers to guide it through and make sure it's feeding straight into those little channels. Now, on this particular dress, because you've got a waistband in it, there's something that you can do just to make sure that the seam lines of the waistband on the back bodice are going to match the seam lines of the waistband on the front bodice. So once you've got one side of your concealed zip sewn in, I would recommend closing the zip and put a little marker or a pin or something to mark the position of the seam lines of the waistband, and then open the zip back up, and then you know that those pins or markers have to be lined up with the seam line on the other side of the dress. So forget about the top and bottom of the dress, just make sure that they're lined up, because that's the obvious bit that you want to make sure is lined up. And then again, pin it or hand tack it on, whatever method you're using to keep the zip into place before you sew it. And then again, just sew it, making sure that those little teeth feed into the channel of the zip. Now, when it comes to putting the sleeves onto your dress, because they're very full, they've got this lovely sort of butterfly shape to them, and you've got quite a long narrow hem to do on the sleeves. What I would suggest that you do is sew your sleeve together, so you've got your underarm seam to sew, and then before you actually put the sleeve onto the dress, do the hem at that point. If you're doing your hem once the sleeve is already on the dress, then you're trying to do this really narrow hem when you've got a whole dress attached to it, which, is obviously doable. It's just a little bit more kind of bulky and cumbersome. So the pattern gets you to hem it once it's actually on, but I think it might be easier to do it once you've done that underarm seam, then hem it, then put the sleeve on. I have also seen lots of versions of the dress without the sleeves as well, and actually before I put the sleeves on, I tried the dress just for sort of fit, and because I was excited and I wanted to see what it looked like, and it does look really nice without the sleeves as well. So that could always be an option for you too. If you didn't want to put the sleeves on, just put bias binding around the armholes, and I think it would look really nice as a sleeveless dress too. So I hope you find those tips useful. If you do have any other questions or anything at all, please just ask me in the comments below, and I'll aim to help as soon as I can. I think you're going to love this dress. I really hope you enjoy making it, and thanks so much again for getting one of our Sewing Society kits, and I'll see you soon. Happy sewing! Bye!